The wall completed, celebrating God's protection and grace. Today's focus, the dedication of the wall. Find Foods, 7 minutes a day, 1 Bible a year. Grace and peace, everyone. Our reading today brings us to the last two chapters of Nehemiah, chapters 12 through 13. Our key verse is, "And on that day they offered great sacrifices, rejoicing because God had given them great joy. The women and children also rejoiced." The sound of rejoicing in Jerusalem could be heard far away. Nehemiah 12. Today we talk about the dedication of the wall. During the third return, Nehemiah, the cupbearer to the Persian king, led the third return and rebuilt the wall. Previously, the temple had been completed and the law had been taught. Both the seen and the unseen were in place. Then, for long-term security, the wall was built. In the process of building the wall, they overcame external opposition from enemies and internal conflicts as well. The wall marked the boundary of protection, the area within which the city dwelt. Earlier, we saw that the poor had been oppressed, so Nehemiah stepped in to uphold justice. Then they joyfully held the dedication ceremony for the wall. The word dedication means to dedicate something to God. But does God need a wall? If we talk about dedicating an offering or dedicating the temple, that we can understand. But why call it the dedication of the wall? Is the wall for our own use or for God's use? So, what is the meaning of this dedication? Even if it is dedicated to God, we are still the ones who use it. God does not make use of it directly, nor can it be offered to God's servants or priests like a sacrifice. So why is it called the dedication of the wall? The key to the book of Nehemiah is rebuild the wall. As for the structure of Nehemiah, today we come to the final part, the final reforms. Let's look at the scripture. The dedication is purification. At the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, the Levites were sought out from where they lived and were brought to Jerusalem to celebrate joyfully the dedication with songs of thanksgiving and with the music of cymbals, harps, and lyres. The musicians also were brought together from the region around Jerusalem, from the villages of the Neh12-13. When the priests and Levites had purified themselves ceremonially, they purified the people, the gates, and the wall. I had the leaders of Judah go up on top of the wall. I also assigned the two large choirs to give thanks. One was to proceed on top of the wall to the right, toward the dung gate. Hoshea and half the leaders of Judah followed them. The second choir proceeded in the opposite direction. I followed them on top of the wall, together with half the people, past the Tower of the Ovens to the broad wall, Nehemiah 12. Upon the completion of the wall, they walked around the city to perform the dedication. Let us first look at this diagram. The dedication began at the valley gate. It says that to the left was the direction of the Tower of the Ovens and the broad wall. That was the left side. To the right was the direction of the dung gate. Each of the 10 gates of the wall of Jerusalem carried its own significance. For example, the dung gate was where waste and garbage were disposed of. The fish gate was where fish and other seafood were bought and sold. The sheep gate was where sheep, cattle, and sacrificial animals entered. The other gates follow similar patterns. We can explore them in more detail when we have the opportunity. In short, one group went to the left, the other to the right, and together they circled the entire wall, carrying out the dedication. Since Nehemiah wrote in the first person, he says I and speaks of himself. But earlier in the passage, it mentions the people, as well as the Levites and the singers. So regarding the dedication, it says that the priests and Levites purified themselves, and they also purified the people, the gates, and the wall. Purifying themselves meant offering a sin offering. Both they themselves and the people were human beings. But the gates and the wall also needed to be purified. Even though they were material objects, they too needed purification. Ever since Adam and Eve sinned, the ground had been cursed. After the exile, the land had gone through much war and turmoil. Many negative and unclean things had taken place within the city. The same was true of those who had returned. Therefore, they first purified themselves and then purified everything they had built. The wall and the gates were physical objects. In the same way, when we build a new house, buy a new car, or acquire some object, we can also dedicate it in the name of the Lord, purifying it before we use it. This too is a form of dedication. As for the left side, the tower of the ovens was associated with fire. It may have been used for baking bread or for ironwork. The broad wall was a thick, sturdy section of the wall. As mentioned earlier, Nehemiah himself went along with them. So the meaning of the dedication is twofold. First, purification. Purify yourself first, then purify what you have built and what you use. Second, dedication is also about thanksgiving, joy, and presenting ourselves. The two choirs that gave thanks then took their places in the house of God. So did I, together with half the officials, as well as the priests, Eliakim, Maaseiah, Minyamin, Micaiah, Elioenai, Zechariah, and Hananiah with their trumpets. And on that day they offered great sacrifices, rejoicing because God had given them great joy. At that time, men were appointed to be in charge of the storerooms for the contributions, first fruits and tithes. From the fields around the towns they were to bring into the storerooms the portions required by the law for the priests and the Levites. Nehemiah 12. So they held a time of thanksgiving with singing and the sounding of trumpets. It was a proclamation, and they offered great sacrifices. The text does not specify what kind of sacrifices these were. Perhaps they included various types. Most likely, they offered burnt offerings as well as thank offerings, which are fellowship offerings. Earlier, when they purified themselves, they had offered sin offerings. So here, these are collectively called great sacrifices, and they rejoiced greatly, because God had given them great joy. The thank offering, the fellowship offering, could be eaten by ordinary people and shared among one another. In fact, when we share a fellowship meal, after giving thanks, we share it with our brothers and sisters. Those who are better off provide more. Those who are less well off or unable to provide give less, or the cost is covered by the church funds. Because what people give goes into the offering box, and the fellowship meal is paid for from the offering box, so we all share together. We give to God, and we also draw from what is given to God, and we rejoice greatly. The joy that God gives is often connected with eating, drinking, and gladness. The temple had storerooms. The contributions, first fruits, and tithes were placed there for sacrifices and for the Levites. Besides burnt offerings, there were grain offerings, produce of the land. They brought first fruits and tithes. The Levites served God full time. They had no fields or flocks. God was their inheritance. So when people give to God, the supply comes from God's storeroom to his servants, not because God needs it, but for his ministers. This is giving to God, and it pleases him. So dedication is thanksgiving, joy, and presenting ourselves. Then what kind of completion requires a dedication? If it is the temple, that is understandable. But why does the wall require a dedication? Let us compare this with another scripture. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. Proverbs 3. We can compare this with Proverbs. The produce of the land can be offered to honor God. We give only a portion, but our barns, that is, all that we have, will be filled to overflowing. Because we give a portion, for example, a tenth, then the remaining 9/10 will be filled, and even more. When we give to God, he himself takes responsibility. It becomes a shared ownership between us and God. Offering the firstborn and the first fruits is both a presenting of our hearts and something we actually do. God then blesses what remains, that is, our own storerooms, and they will be filled to overflowing. So why is it that those who give are blessed? It is more blessed to give than to receive, because God Himself will fill us. So are the crops and produce for our use, or for God's use. In fact, they are for our use and also for the priests. But God looks at our hearts when we are willing to provide for God's priests. God pours out abundant blessings, for God is with us and dwells among us. So we use them, and they are also used by God, because when we give to God, He takes responsibility. Therefore, the meaning of dedication is fourfold: purification, thanksgiving, joy, and presenting ourselves. Reading Guide to Nehemiah. The key to the book of Nehemiah is rebuild the wall, set in the return age. There were 3 exiles, and correspondingly 3 returns. Today we talked about the third return. Chapter 12, the dedication of the wall. Chapter 13, the final chapter, Nehemiah's reforms. Be sure to read the scripture passage for yourselves. Nehemiah used the wall to preserve the Sabbath. Since the foreigners did not observe the Sabbath, Nehemiah used the opening and closing of the gates, along with various restrictions, to limit commercial activities on the Sabbath day. So the wall served to preserve the Sabbath. The wall had gates, and this is just like us. The gates of our own lives, when to open and when to close, are like the gates of this wall, creating boundaries and living a life set apart. Because the Sabbath is a day to rest and to reflect on God, not a day for doing business. Today's focus, the dedication of the wall, was not our own. It was shared with God. The meaning of a dedication is purification, thanksgiving, joy, and presenting ourselves. When we dedicate something to God, He takes responsibility for it. Blessed is the one whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on His law day and night. Fine food, 7 minutes. See you tomorrow.